my pleasure to welcome the second panel who's making their way up. Please get comfy. This panel is titled Futures, Responding to Urgent Realities and Situations Through Artistic, Curatorial and Organising Practice. And on the panel, I'll just briefly introduce them. We have Aida Azin, who's an artist and community organiser, founder of Saluhan Collective, a Filipino collective established to create a network between creatives in Australia and the Philippines. Aida is also a member of the West Base Artists Committee, which is a group of artists who help us guide our thinking and our programming, so we're really thrilled to have you on board, Aida. Archie Barry, who's a disciplinary visual artist. Their work is autobiographical, somatic, process-led, spanning performance, video, music composition, and writing. And in 2019, Archie and Spence Messier co-wrote a set of guidelines for institutions, galleries, and curators working with trans, non-binary, and gender-diverse artists in Australia. So titled Clear Expectations, this resource was supported by Countess and our visual arts peak body, NAVA. We have Gabi Briggs as well, a research-based artist and community organiser. Gabi engages in the complexities of race, power and truth-telling, seeking to restore Indigenous sovereignty and enact self-determination. And Gabi is the recipient of the 2024 West Space Commission, so we're really thrilled to work with Gabi over the next year to realise her project in the space. And Torika, I'm so sorry, can you pronounce your last name for me? Boltagici. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Boltagici.
Thank you. A Fijian Australian artist, writer and academic, Torika runs the Community Reading Room, which grew out of a community need for a collection and space for First Nations, Black and global Indigenous artists of colour to connect with each other, and an archive of books and ephemera that privileged the creative practices of their kin, ancestors and peers. So I'm going to hand over now to our panel's chair, Aziz, who's an arts worker whose work builds interdisciplinary connections between art, history, archives, literature, theatre and biography. And they moved to Melbourne earlier this year to undertake a PhD in curatorial practice at Monash University. So thanks so much for hosting this panel as a new NAM resident. Aziz.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This is actually my first ever panel in Australia, having been here for not even half a year. And I just want to start off by acknowledging country in my, not my actually native language, but my unfortunately national language in Pakistan, which is Urdu, because I think like a lot of us, I've also lost the language of my grandparents, which was different. मैं इस सरज़मीन आसमान और आब गुज़रगाहों के मलकान को तस्लीम करना चाहता हूँ जिनके ताल्लुक़ वुरुंजरी बुरुंग और बुरुंग कौम और बाशिंदे से है और माजी हाल और आने वाले बुज़ुर्गों को खिराज तहसीन पेश करना चाहता हूँ. And I'm really grateful and honored to be here, to be on this panel with some really powerful, incredible thinkers who I find an allyship and solidarity with, having learning on this land and on this continent. And when Seb and Joe invited me to sort of convene with them and think with them, I was thinking of the futures and sort of what is to come and the context that we're in, and sort of responding to sort of urgent realities through curatorial, organizing and artistic practice. And I just want to say that before I kind of sort of move through the panel, kind of just to lay a bit of the groundwork of how we're going to proceed. So I was reflecting on my own position as someone who arrived to Australia earlier this year in March, and I'd never come here before. I'd never been this east or this west, depending on what your positionality is in the world. And I took this flight, the Sri Lankan air flight from Colombo to Melbourne, which was my final kind of destination. And I was feeling the weight of this plane. I'd lived in the US and other parts of the global north, which Australia imagined itself to be in the global north. And I guess that's the imagination that it needs to undo. And the plane was full of brown people from Sri Lanka and Pakistan. And I felt this weight of the diaspora, of people sort of leaving these homelands, including myself, with deep climatic and ecological and economic stress and crisis, and sort of this exodus that we are a part of. And then being here, and the first kind of, when the plane kind of actually got onto the land, the Australian land, when it arrived, like the location was called Bluff Point on the map. And I was like, oh, here I am bluffing my way through this continent, which of course, historically, you hear all this about Australia. Historically, it has had such an exclusionary and violent history, both for people who have lived here for many years and thousands of years, and for people who try to come here who don't kind of fit into the mold of this land. And so for me, in this current moment that we emerge from in this pandemic, and in its wake, what we grapple with on this land, right, having been here for the last few months, the kind of conversation around Indigenous justice and repair, on climate crisis, on justice and empowerment and activism for trans and queer communities, dealing with the history of refugee detention that Australia still has perfected and actually been one of the first countries in the world to kind of do. So for me, what does it become to kind of think about cultural practice in this moment with institutions and with communities? And what is the impulse? So sort of the groundwork that we're laying is what is the political impulse? What is the kind of what drives our practice? And the panelists here, they all, for me, define an expanded cultural practice, not just artists, but curators, organizers, community workers, storytellers, people who kind of move in and out of the institution in an uneasy way. We've been discussing what is the institution? Is it healthy? What does it mean for us? I think of the concept of the undercommons, first outlined by Fred Moten, about kind of this idea of stealing from the institution and having a fugitive relationship to it. So sort of that's where we add. This is what sort of the context that we're placing with us. The way we're going to do the panel, each of our speakers is going to speak for about 6 to 8 minutes on sort of their work, their practice, their impulses, and what drives them. And then it's amazing. We've had these great conversations. It's going to be brilliant. I think I'm just so honored and moved by their power. And then we want to open it up to all of y'all, because one thing that we also chatted about is that we become these representatives of communities or kind of places that we come from. But all the people here could be on this panel and have this conversation with us. I think just the readings that we just witnessed was really a really great echo of that. So as much as possible, after we go through that, it would be great to get on audience comments and conversation, because I think this is really the last panel in that way to have that conversation. But on that note, over to you, Gabi.
Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the sovereignty of the Wurundjeri people. I recognise my relationship with this land, and with the lack of treaty, I'll always consider how I can honour and respect Wurundjeri sovereignty. So I've got some slides. So on the top right-hand corner, you can see a quote from a man called Maurice Walsh. He was a convict who was assigned at a New England station in 1897. He speaks of the harrowingly violent frontier in which lubras and pickaninnies were not spared. I have juxtaposed this quote with a map made by my cousin Callum Clayton Dixon, in which he has mapped sites of conflict between the Anouan people and settlers that occurred on Anouan country during the frontier. Both the map and the quotes like this found within the archive spurred on the making of the illustration I made on the left. I have circled each site of conflict in ascending order, with each site growing in size. I feel like this illustration makes visible the Black witness, and it shows the incredibly large void that has been manifested from conflict, showing the great devastation from the attempted genocide and ecocide on Anouan country. It is with this side that I want to acknowledge the importance of telling country's story and the need for us to heal her. My positionality is core to my practice, and it is anchored in a deep love and deep responsibility for the legacy of my two grandmothers, Sue Briggs and Patsy Cohen, two very staunch and strong Anouan women. They are the women who loved me, have grown me, and have shown what kinship and care are. It is through their eyes that I see country. It is with their knowledge that I can place myself in my country's landscape. I'm Anouan on both my grandmothers, from both my grandmothers. It is where I've lived most of my life, and it is where most of my family are now. So the map on the left is a map of the Anawan clans, and the map on the right is to help you contextualise where it is on the east coast of Australia, which doesn't really show some curvature, but you can see Coffs Harbour on the coast, but we're basically halfway between Brisbane and Sydney inland, and we're also known as the New England, which is wild. The next slide. My current practice and organising is centred on my experience as an Anawan Gedjera. The closest term to understand Gedjera in the English language is woman, but, you know, that's quite broad, I think. But it is the way in which I explore my relationship to country, specifically it being stolen country. The methodology positions me as the Anawan artist in tandem and embedded within the Anawan community. Central to my practice is the community and country that has raised me and where my family has been since time immemorial. It is through our ancient connection to this land and to each other that we are born already into a complex web of interwoven relationships that provide a deep interdependence and interconnectedness, ensuring no one was left behind. It is also through our collective survival of genocide and ongoing colonial violence that we connect. It is with these ancestral ties to each other and country that I frame my practice in relation to them, and it is also the impetus of my research through Wominjeka Jimbana at Monash University. I'll explain those pictures. This was on NAIDOC this year. I went back home to help run a kinship workshop. We're at a really exciting time back home where we've made significant breakthroughs in being able to revitalise kinship. It's been a really big pivotal change in my practice. Foregrounding my relationships is critical in honouring and respecting this interconnectedness and independence that ties me to Anawan country. By drawing upon the epistemologies and ontologies embedded within my community, I intentionally acknowledge our unique experience and the ways of knowing, being and doing that have been passed down for generations. I seek to foreground the intergenerational ways of knowing and being that have been passed on through Anawan kinship systems. I seek to honour the ontological ways of kinship systems and how they embed relationality and relational responsibility by revitalising and interrogating my skin responsibilities. By prescribing to a sophisticated and complex ancient code wherein it is written that I am Arkan and my parents are Irana and Mbunga, I am looking after and showing a depth of relationship that is embedded within our ways of knowing. Next one. Further to this, the women in my life, informed by my matriarchs, have instilled a deep sense of kinship and responsibility with me. I see myself as being accountable to a large kinship network in which much of it exists on Anawan lands. It has shaped my understanding of survival and community and the interconnectedness of both things. We have survived the colony largely due to the embedded kinship responsibilities in our communities, and it is within Indigenous cultural domains. Relationality means that one experiences the self as part of others, and that others are the part of self. This is learnt through reciprocity, obligation, shared experience, coexistence, cooperation, social memory. So within that, my organising's informed by that. The image on the right is from a banner making workshop that we did back up home that I organised when we had lost Tani Chatfield through as a death in custody. That's just me with his family doing that stuff. So there's this really deep responsibility I feel to my community. I am grassroots, and essentially my practice is matching up with my personal goals in life. It is an engine for me to process and experiment and to centre decolonisation. I have organised around the forced closures of Aboriginal communities, Black deaths in custody, climate justice, land back, truth-telling, treaty and sovereignty. So this is some of my practice. Queens, the work on the left was a video work. I created a counterfiction to the colonial narrative created by the Australian Archive, using my body to author my own narratives as an Indigenous woman, as an Anawan woman. I challenged the male colonial gaze to regain my autonomy and power myself through this process. And then the other one, Mara Byrne, was a performance. As an Anawan woman, I reclaim my agency and autonomy by confronting the violent incursions that have been enacted on my very essence. Next one. And then Surviving New England, Our Koori Matriarchs is a series of 10 portraits of Aboriginal matriarchs. They were printed on banners. We hung them out at the community garden. That's just out the mission, back up home. It provided a platform for us to really celebrate our old girls. And it was done through a collective decision-making process. But the really cool thing about that work was those women brought a whole lot of people. There was like a good 200 or so people who came to that because it was actually celebrating something that meant a lot to all of us. Sorry, I hope I'm not rambling here. The photo on the left is of a portrait I took of my grandmother for that exhibition, Patsy Cohen, and the photo on the right is of her. She's published in the New Dawn magazine, a magazine from the New South Wales Aboriginal Protection Board, which was issued monthly between 1915 to 1969 to the Aboriginal people of New South Wales. It was essentially just state propaganda. But yeah, she was a proud Anawan woman, a mother of 6, a Stolen Generations member, and was an incredible knowledge holder and researcher, and who inspired me really to do my PhD. So in the late 80s, my nan worked with Professor Margaret Somerville in researching the local Aboriginal community's connection to Inglebah Aboriginal Reserve and the 5 Black matriarchs who have connection there and that many Anawan people have connection to. Those women are Granny Morris, Granny Widdis, Granny Wright, Granny Mariah and Granny Mackenzie. And then the photo up on the top right is of us out at Inglebah one Christmas, and the photo down the bottom is my nan with her mother as well. So yeah, my nan's research was the impetus of me undertaking this PhD project, and I'm basing my PhD research on a walk that is mentioned in the book. This is an old school map where I've done this squiggly line, which is the planned route of the walk. So I'm planning to undertake this walk, which is around 80 to 100 kilometres, a walk that my ancestors took annually to Inglebah to Larmdale Showground. The project aims to shed light on the complexities of land ownership and sovereign Indigenous access in the colonial apocalypse through an investigation of the correlation between settler colonialism and violence against Indigenous women by collapsing timelines from the frontier to the present day in an attempt to provocate who cares about Aboriginal women. Through an anti-colonial framework and Indigenous research methodology, and by anchoring it with an Anawan kinship revitalisation, and I'm looking at, how revitalising Anawan kinship can be a mode of care for Aboriginal women. Next one. So this is, I have started my research and I went and visited one of the properties that I'll be walking through. It's called Terrible Vale, which a terrible Billy used to live on, who was apparently quite a horrible person. But yeah, that's just some photos of it. And yeah, I'm really keen to yarn with these fellas a bit more about the institution. I have many thoughts about the institution and my positioning within it. I've been talking about how I feel like we're very much always pushing shit up a hill, and that is no matter in which space that we're in. But I think we can navigate these spaces, we can get lost in these spaces, but it's through yarns like this that I think we can really understand our positionality and the power of ourselves within those spaces. So that's me.
Thank you so much. Aida, would you want to? Oh, it's Aida.
Is it on? Is it on? Yeah. No? Okay. That was on. I just wanted to say thank you for that, because I just feel like it's a real honour to be up here with you, and with all of you. I'm really excited to hear more about everyone's practices, and yeah, just thank you for having me. Yeah. So yes, my name's Aida, and I didn't really come as prepared. I kind of like to do things off the cuff, and so my practice is kind of more painting and installation, but then I guess I've got a kind of a community group, what would I call it, collective called Saluhan that I'm part of, and that sort of came together as an extension of my practice, which was to do with identity and I guess looking at racism. I guess that was probably like an umbrella for everything I find interesting. I'm not really sure where to start now. I think you just sort of blew me away.
I can...
Yeah, give me some prompts.
I remember, well, when we were discussing, you talked about the collective as a space to enjoy each other, and then this idea of like things, also kind of the institution being not that space maybe, so maybe...
Yeah, I think this for me might be an example of that, where I definitely get a lot more out of casual, intimate, sort of conversational spaces. And I think that's something that I'm noticing more and more with the collective as it starts to expand as well, is that we're sort of welcoming more and more people in, Filipino diaspora, that is. And it's great, but I think that I'm missing those one-on-one sort of chats that you have with people. Yeah. keep talking to me.
Well, do you know something?
I was just going to say, because you're talking earlier.
We got so many mics.
No, I won't read. Sorry, I should shut up. Well, I was just going to prompt because you were talking about your experience at art school or like why you needed to start the collective, really.
Oh, yeah. So I guess, and that's something that, thank you, that's something that has kind of driven my practice as well, is a lack of representation, I guess you'd say, pretty much just not seeing those Filipino mixed race diaspora kids. And, to be honest, my parents' generation really not validating that I'm, I am part of the family in a way. I am Filipino and Iranian as well. And in university, just, I guess, I think that you also said it, that we weren't given a space to have like crits that actually were meaningful, because your work is seen as sentimental or, something like that. Yeah.
One thing that I think we all touched on, at least I said it, like when I came here, like I went to an art opening, and the first ever art opening, and I was struck at the whiteness of it. And I thought I like went back 30 years, or like from the US, or at least from my context in Los Angeles there. And I think something we've been also talking about is like that safe space for community that like is not, we also spoke about that, Gabi, like when we were having that conversation, like how to kind of create that safe space, but also kind of navigate ourselves through like funding structures and through institutions.
Yeah. Like, I think, and again, back to Saluhan, probably one of my most meaningful experiences was just coming up with money from my own account, not much money, and putting on events and just meeting everyone one by one through those DMs and through shaking their hand in person. And I think that created kind of a trust between us. And we further on down the line, it was like, oh, okay, maybe we should try and really make this an activist space. And I think that there was maybe an idea that we should be doing it in a traditional sort of model, like doing the banners and everything like that. But I think that what was really missing is, the kinship. And so I think that that's kind of where we're at the moment, is providing that space for each other to have a relationship, have a bit of trust, because I think that for Filipino diaspora, it's been really missing. And it's interesting now kind of watching the senior generation wanting to make a bit of a connection with us, because they're seeing that we're gaining traction. And I don't think we're even ready for that with our seniors. So it's going to be interesting to see where it is in like 10 years or something. Yeah.
I'm just gonna just say thank you, and I also just want to say that I think the themes that are coming up like are about collectivity, about kind of connecting to ancestors, kinship. I think also this thing about like funding, which is kind of hanging out around. I mean, I know you've been touching upon that as well a little bit, and the institution and our sort of uneasy relationship with the institution. And Archie, I don't know if you would like to jump in here a bit about sort of.
Okay. I can speak to those things. I think also, like, I'm not going to talk about my art practice today. There's like 2 photos of artworks I've done, but I don't want to talk about my art practice today. I think for this panel, it sort of makes more sense to speak about this document, which I wrote with another artist in 2019 with Spence Messai. It's got such a long title that I always forget it. It's called Clear Expectations, Guidelines for Institutions, Galleries and Curators Working with Trans, Non-Binary and Gender Diverse Artists. And so one of the prompts that Aziz gave me for today was to think about what's happened in 5 years since 2019, when this was publicly available. And my initial answer was nothing, which is a pretty sad indictment. But it's also, that's not entirely true. Like I was saying, there's some toilets now in big institutions where trans people can feel safe. So that's good. That's something. But I was reflecting this morning on how trans people, as well as brown people, as well as black people, as well as indigenous people, as well as disabled people, all of the people of minority identities are often brought into institutional programming as the public program, as the performers, as the speakers, as the kind of in the roles that bring the kind of like vitality and the presence, but also in the roles that kind of keep you in like that. There's no major public institution in Australia that has collected a work by a trans person, to my knowledge. So I haven't really had like robust conversations with arts organizers or curators about this document. It kind of exists as like a self-advocacy thing that I know some people can bring into a space and say like, look, here's a guideline, here's like some requests that I have around how to keep me safe. But I think something that was like maybe a good provocation was like what means, what are the conditions that make it hard for trans or non-binary people to be artists and to have creative practices in the first instance. And I think that that's maybe like there's a whole range of factors there that I think people are afraid of and afraid to talk about, and are very like foundational factors such as the ability to afford healthcare, which means like, yeah, the ability to have money to live in a body that you're comfortable in. Because if you can't live in your body, you're not comfortable in the world. You're not comfortable making things public. So that's one thing, like access to safe housing, and yeah, like a whole range of issues there. Yeah, I don't experience like arts institutions as places that think about those things or respond to those things. And I don't find them to be places where there's much solidarity. Sorry for being so... No, I'm not sorry. But I did want to speak about that there are like the places that are actually meaningful and offer sustenance to me are, in my experience, really separate from the art world. So the place where those conversations do exist and the solidarity is being built and there is a sense of kinship is in this thing called trans sharing circles, which is like a over time it's been monthly and sometimes it's been fortnightly. It's a space where a group of people come together and talk about their lives and experiences, and it's peer led and it's voluntary. There's no money. It's always in someone's house and people talk about all kinds of things, mental health, physical health, family, and also seems, yeah, like it's an important space. Like I was saying earlier, how for trans people, like an enduring need is to meet each other and to see ourselves in others, because we're not born into families of trans people. So we find our families later in life. And it's that process of like finding each other that, can sustain us through the difficult conditions that make it hard to become artists, to have the space and capacity to be creative. I think that's all I'll say.
That's really great. I'm just hearing like this selection of like kind of people sort of sharing so many things. Like, I mean, I think you're also talking about kin and kind of creating kinship across and sort of having these other sites that are not art world sites or institutional sites. I mean, something that I also am just reflecting on when you're just saying about health is like as a queer person, Australia, and as a non-Australian person who also doesn't have permanent residence. And I thought it was like so interesting. I love Jingwa's performance, but like anyone who's not Australian or are not even a permanent resident is not eligible for anything like Medicare or job seeker. And Australia is like one of the few countries where like even if you live here for like 5 years until you get that status, you're not eligible. Like new migrants cannot actually get access for like 4 years or something wild. And like if you're HIV positive, you cannot get permanent residence in Australia. It's like one of the like very few countries left. And like the US, you know, you can become an immigrant, New Zealand, UK. So, I mean, I think there's all these barriers to like, which I think come out of our intersection of like blackness, brownness, immigrantness, transness, and then intersecting with class and health and immigrant and status and where you are. And I think this is just something that I think we're talking a bit about exhaustion around that, having those conversations. And in that way, I was just kind of referring back to the day. But I feel like, Torika, you've been speaking a bit about that as well. And I perhaps want to sort of And with you, this at least this kind of more formal conversation bit so that we can open it up to folks. Thank you.
Is it on? It is. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. I, like Archie, I'm not going to actually talk about my my practice so much as, so my visual arts practice, only to kind of give a sort of an introduction, I guess, to how the my social practice or the community reading room is kind of linked to kind of how I move through the world and why I do the things that I do, I guess. I think we were talking before about all of the kind of the multiple bits of work that we do in different spaces. And I was thinking about how quite often my work has always been about like what's valued in different spaces, or how I get my artwork is more about sort of how black and brown bodies are valued or devalued, undervalued, not valued at all in different contexts. So various works that kind of look at, so my background is Fijian, Anglo-Australian, and like some of the art, we didn't mention it, but like how your artwork is your way of sort of getting to know about your identity as well. I think that was something that we sort of spoke about.
I feel like my artwork is like a documentation of the process of finding out who I am. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really resonated with that. And so, yeah, thinking about how, Fijians' bodies are valued in some places, and different value systems and different knowledge systems, and how they, are not the same. So I've looked at like military migration and like the commodification of black and brown bodies for military recruitment. And I've been looking at things like the way that Fijian Pacifica bodies are recruited in sort of sports contexts. So that's kind of like a broad way of thinking about my arts practice. But I guess what I'm sort of talking about here today is like the valuing of like knowledge systems. And we were talking earlier about how we've all had sort of experiences through our tertiary educations where we haven't felt nurtured or nourished. And so the reading room sort of came out of that, that collective, like those, small discussions, those intimate discussions with other artists. I don't know if Salotti's still in the room, but like connecting with other Pacific Islander artists who had come through an institution where, often, at the end of a crit session, it would be silent because there wasn't a sort of a context, or the person, the educator holding the space for us didn't have the context to kind of relate back to that work or expand the discussion or deepen any discussion about that work. So it just kind of lands nowhere. And that can be really disheartening, I think. So I suppose it's those moments where you find people outside the institution and you create these smaller kind of possibilities for connection, and you become what you needed. You create those conversations and those critical spaces to actually get the genuine feedback that you need. Yeah. And so the first sort of reading room came out of that, or it was sort of like me thinking about how I could share my collection of books, but it was also after visiting like the Stuart Hall library in London and thinking how wonderful it would be to have a similar space in Melbourne that really focused on like non-Western art practices. And so that's when I started to look at my own collection and look at the bits of exhibition ephemera that I'd been collecting over the years from other artist exhibitions, that, little essays and things that are not held in bigger institutions but hold like that I value and that I think, our peers were also valuing. And so over the years it's just sort of, it's a really personal collection of books. As you can see, it's kind of all over the place. But I think the most sort of valuable part of that collection are those little sort of breadcrumbs that leave that sort of trail for younger emerging artists of the Pacific diaspora, of the African diaspora, to kind of feel like the things that they are, that they are wanting to see or that they value are also, they're there, and just because they're not sort of a part of the mainstream, art curriculum. And I think that's changing a lot. Like, I think, there's a lot of people doing amazing work in institutions as well. So what else do I want to say?
Say that thing about
What did I say?
about how it's like giving something so that the people don't feel like they're making it. They're the first one to start it. Like they're not making it from scratch.
Yeah,
But you said it better.
I can't remember what I said, but it was something about all those, like, the catalogues and things, right? And so, for emerging artists and scholars to kind of see the trail of people who've been doing the thing, and whether they want to reject it completely or respond to it, but they can see that there's a legacy of practices there. Yeah, well, that's the idea, through collecting all
No,
this.
I think that's really important, is when you're studying, especially, and just say you've had a crypt that was empty or just focused on the wrong thing. I kept getting told that my work was sentimental, and I threw out artworks because I was told that my work was sentimental. But there are people here who supported me so much through my whole studies, and that's probably why I'm not expanding on my practice, because I feel like all my friends are here anyway, so I don't need to talk about it. But you made a point about, like, when you're studying, you need to know that you're not just this, like, little person on a boat by yourself, that there are all these islands that you can visit, all these islands of knowledge and community, and it can meet all the different intersections that make up you, and there are different styles, and that you're not just doing this out of nowhere, that so many people have gone through a journey similar to yours, and you can learn from their practice, and you can be yourself because it fills the gap of knowledge that's missing, or something like that. Yeah.
You said it right, really well, Aida, I have to just say. I know we have about 20-25 minutes, so I think this is, like, so powerful, and I think so many beautiful themes and important things have come up. Ideas of kinship, support, community, solidarity, not being the first one, leaving that archive, right? The institution not being a space of sustenance, but we're all kind of moving through it or moving out of it all the time. And I just do want to, I don't want this to be this conversation that we're just having, that I feel like, I wonder if there's, like, people who have comments or questions, who want to jump in. I'm seeing a lot of silent people just looking at us. But, like, this would be really nice. I mean, we can keep talking, but I think there's, like, definitely people in the audience who would want to, I think it's very much like stage in that. It would be great if it was a circle, but it's okay. But yeah, are there folks who want to just jump in with thoughts, comments, questions? Yeah. I don't know if there's a mic thing. How does it work? If, like, oh yeah, perfect. There's a mic coming to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm not sure that I'm making Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but I don't think the mics.
Oh.
Or is it?
Hello. Yeah. I think mob are always going to have a difficult relationship with the institution, given the real harm that it has perpetuated. You've got the eugenics department that was University of Melbourne that did real damage. So there's real harm. I go into the institution not naive about that. And we've been having really big yarns prior to this panel about the workload of us being in those institutions. We don't have the privilege like some who can just go in and do a PhD, which is crazy in itself. It's a lot of work. But we've got to do the double work to make it safe, to do the things that you've been doing. So there's that. At Monash, there is a Indigenous unit through the Fine Arts School that has been delivered, and it will be becoming mandatory as of next year. So there is potential for great change when there's Indigenous knowledges embedded within curriculum, but I do have to say that I think there is great harm, great danger, great risk of our thinking, our knowledges being co-opted whilst the institution still is very harmful. I'm going through the ethics process at the moment, which is not fun at all, but these institutions are still, I believe, pillars of white success, of white supremacy, and extracting knowledges outside of whiteness has been a big part of it as to why they're so big and powerful. So at all times, mob have to be considered, have to think double time about our place in it, the real harm, how are we going to keep ourselves safe, how are we going to keep mob safe. There's real risk of, our stuff being appropriated. There's just a pattern of how the colony works for a very long time, and we're very knowledgeable of that. And I still think there's massive risks for being involved in it. But that's everywhere. Like, we are in a dilemma, and I choose to do my work through the institution, but I'm not silly. Yeah. Is there anything else?
I love that. Do you guys, any of you want to respond or to that question, or Torika?
I feel like I haven't really been in academia, so I don't know.
I guess, I've sort of observed changes over, post 2020 with this sudden kind of need to be more inclusive and diverse, and the danger also is that you have like often small units of First Nation academics who then get pulled to do everything, come and speak at this, and so there's that. Apart from the fact that you're already, having multiple, as you said before, like being responsible for holding that kind of temporal space of, I don't want to say it for you because you said it so beautifully, but past and present and the future, just avoiding burnout is like just paramount. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, thoughts? I'm just keen to get more people's voices in. This is my thing. But sorry, someone? I can't even see, but sure. Whoever's waving, just go for it.
Hey, I wanted to follow on about migrants and people on any visa category being excluded from Centrelink and Medicare, and also pretty much like all arts funding bodies in Australia, like the Australia Council and most of the state-based funding bodies, also won't fund anyone who doesn't have permanent residency, and that obviously flows on to organisations that are funded through any kind of government funding. Just wondering, and this is kind of for everyone in the room as well as anyone on stage, what is happening around that? Is anyone actively organising around that, or I don't know, what do we think?
Can I just briefly respond to that first just because I'm feeling it. So Australia is wildly desiring immigrants right now, which is bizarre to me in a way. They're just there's all this thing about shortage of labor. And coming as a Pakistani person, every white collar service job that I see happening in Australia is done by brown students. And like the Uber driver, the person who at midnight, if you are drunk and go to Flinders Station, sorry, clearly this happened to me. On the other side, what was that? Lord of the Fries or something, that place. They're all, they're serving all of Australia, and there's a continuous exclusion of them. And I'm meeting people who lived in Tasmania for 4 years so they could get some regional visa, so they could become an immigrant. It's the most bizarre this is not happening in the US. Like, US has its own kind of weird failures around immigration, but,
And also, Australia siphons off the education system of every other country to staff like our entire health system.
Yes.
You know, and it's like there's all of this, I guess there's like a particular level of discourse around tertiary education and like kind of trying to move towards more and more of a user pay system, while actually it's like, well, every other government is paying for instance, like undergrad educated health professionals to then come and do a master's in Australia. You know what I mean? It's like everything is staffed by people who got their education funded by another country, and we're taking like all of those workers. Anyway, there's like obviously so many layers to it. But
it's like a Ponzi scheme, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like basically people are paying into like even the university system, right? Like international students pay like 4 times more than Australians, and then that funds like everyone else in Australia, and like it's continuously like a Ponzi scheme. And I think that is interesting because Germany, for example, right? Like you just need to be living in Germany for 1 or 2 years and you start becoming eligible for German arts funding. And it's the same in like Netherlands and Sweden. I've done like a lot of research on this, Canada, you know, and it's like bizarre because Australia is the only one. So I just think that's interesting. I'm glad that you brought that up because it is like something that no one talks about. Because again, what I'm trying to say is like it's a country that perpetually desires immigrants, but then doesn't want to give them access until they're like an able-bodied, productive body that like will pay taxes into that system. Yeah. I don't know if like any folks in the room or like anyone on the panel wants to like respond to that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so just by way of a question, there's this, there's been this thing of years of having these conversations in spaces, which are, they're all really important conversations, but then we don't create actionables, or it doesn't translate into the structure making meaningful changes to meet these preoccupations. So I'm just wondering how. It's going to kill us. Just wondering your perspective in terms of how this stays within the realm of words and parlance and just rhetoric, but doesn't become an action for organizations.
I feel like we're the wrong people to ask, aren't we, around that, because we're kind of doing the... I don't know. Did I misunderstand the question?
I'm just like thinking like what Archie, you said in one of the things about how like you should not be writing this this kind of policy document, not as being a policymaker, but then you wrote this document and then nothing came out of that document, right? In some way, right? Like nothing changed, right? I don't know, like.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of things didn't change, or like a lot of action, maybe there was potential for action and it hasn't come to be. But yeah, I guess it's that thing of like, we're actually all artists. We're not policy writers. We're not, like, maybe there are elements of our practice which, or maybe just as people, we care about people. And when want to like look after our people, like the people who we have affiliation and alignment with. And I feel like, yeah, we're each doing that in a quite different way. But I think maybe policy is not effective. Maybe the kind of really dysfunctional arts funding system that we have is not the best place to try and orient all of our energy. Like, for me, the place to orient energy is in my lounge room, in conversations, in like driving a friend to the doctor's appointment, in talking along the way in the car, in these really like quotidian person-to-person ways. That would be my answer.
I also think like what's like really unique about art world or art institutions is that they don't recognize the quotidian and the daily and the collective. They're always, I think, again, Jingwa, I think you kind of did this in your poem. It's about the exceptional and the person who makes it and the person who kind of survives. But everyone else who kind of didn't make it across along the way, or the daily thing that all that labor doesn't get actually translated, including the labor of like driving someone to like the hospital, or like kind of, you know, walking that walk that like needed to be done. I don't know, like there's so many little labors.
Being a parent.
Being a parent.
Fuck. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I get a lot of praise for what I do and how I do it, and as though I'm like this great artist. Everyone's really happy with me, but then at the end of the day, I'm like, well, why is it still so hard? Why do I still cry at the deadline of every grant application? Why do I almost feel like a PTSD when I apply for a grant? Like when Jinghua was talking the whole time, I was just nodding my head because everything you said is so true. It's so awful as someone who didn't study writing to have to write for a grant and feel like you're one in like how many people who are going to get it for $500 or something like that. And yeah, I don't know. Sorry.
I'm going to put this back into the audience unless someone here, if they're also, I think what people are saying is like making a nice constellation, so people also want to respond to others. You also had your hand up? Like, did someone else? Yeah.
I did have my hand up.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that what I have to say is as relevant as a few minutes ago now. Maybe following on from something that Archie said that I thought was interesting, this idea that, and I think that you're right when you say, we're artists, we're not policy makers. I've noticed in maybe the last 6 years, though I'm sure it's probably been like many decades, a real reorientation of the critical axis of art, going from the gallery to something more like the human resources department. Like I think Rangrupa is a great example of this. Their documento is very much about how they work, not much about the art that they make. I'm interested in that. And I think this panel is reflective of that wave, trend, whatever you want to call it.
Does anyone else? Joe, I feel like, do you want to respond to that as well? Like, should we? Is there any other last comments or questions? Or, yeah.
I don't want to speak more. I feel like I spoke a fucking lot, but anyway, I think that what Thomas is and what this panel demonstrates, and maybe a little bit before, is that for whatever reason, cultural approaches in Australia have been forced into a corner of where activism and methodology become as important as the practice. And I don't know what the solution to that is, but I feel like there's a symptom of that, and maybe that is also a shared global symptom that the documento does highlight, but it also highlights something from a positionality which is of other to Europe, so which Europe had a hard time understanding, from my understanding, if that makes any sense. But anyway, I hope that's an okay thing to add, that there is some kind of, we have come at it from an activist kind of position out of a necessity, whether that's, I'm not trying to be apologetic either. Am I being apologetic?
No. You're not being apologetic.
I just want to also just say, like, I think the Rangrupa thing is interesting just because, like, again, being a documenter, like all the global South people were like, oh my God, this is amazing, we love it, and all, like, I don't want to say this, I've been like already like called out for saying this, like all the white people were like, what is this? Like, and they were like super confused, and sorry, someone like here earlier told me today that they get triggered when I say white people. I don't know why, but the thing is.
But didn't all the artists of colour have a really shit time there, like
They
got
also had a
treated
shit
really,
time.
really badly.
But they also like were feeling very like I think in the communities that were made by brown and black people, they felt really loved with each other, but not by the institution. Do you know what I mean? Of Documenta in broader. Yeah. But I think what I also just want to say is I think that's like interesting what you guys are just bringing up, because in places like Pakistan or Indonesia, like what Rangrupa says is it came out of a necessity of a place like Jakarta, which is like a 30 million people city, which is like it's like, I mean, Karachi, like these cities are like there's no arts funding, like even, you know what I mean? But like they're just kind of, people like hustle and exist and survive in all these amazing ways. So I think what's also interesting is like, the question that I would bring back is, and I think it's just like, what is an artistic life or what is a cultural life as well at the end of the day, right? And like, is the life that everyone lives that is not pure art making itself a life that is to be valued within the cultural sphere itself? I think that would be the question I would want to kind of end with, maybe, yeah.
But I also just think we're on fire also. Like, we have to have agency in what we do, because for blackfellas, it's just survival mode. And I feel like I can, and with the process kind of stuff of my practice, that is where I feel like I have the agency to make actual change. It's not all necessarily what ends up in the gallery, it's just documentation of that. But I would love to be just an artist frolicking around in some paddock or something, you know, but if that's what artists do, I don't know, but I've got a responsibility. So, yeah.
Yeah, but I just don't think that we should be assigned the work. Like, yeah, and that's what I think what you said, it sort of sounds like, is like somewhere along the line, our work that's about issues in activism then became, oh, okay, and now you have the responsibility to fix the things that you're critiquing. That's not what we signed up for. Yeah. And thank you.
Any last kind of? All right, I think we're gonna end on this note. Thank you so much, Joe, and the team at West Place for putting this. Thank you so much to all of you, and I know the conversation will continue, so